All right. Hello and welcome to AdQ&A Live episode 16. I'm Nick Sinitra and today we are talking about tracking pixels. So we are going to be covering what they are, why you should use them, and a bit about how they work. We're going to also do a bit of a platform demo in Facebook, but as I'll mention later, the way that the Facebook tracking pixel works is very similar to how it works on a lot of other platforms. So as kind of a test case, it's a good place to start. All right, so as far as what they are, the short answer is that pixels are a piece of code, right, or a couple different pieces of code, which when placed on your website will give you insight into what people are doing on your site, how they're interacting with it, and things like that, right? So, and we'll get more into the specific pieces of code and where they go and all that stuff, but the best way I can describe this is there's something called angiography, which if you want to visualize what the vasculature, right, what the veins and arteries look like in the human body, you shoot people up with a radioactive isotope, only 3.6 Roentgen, not great, not terrible. And then you take an X-ray and you see what's going on in there. A pixel basically is like that radioactive isotope, which when placed into the body, or the website in this case, allows you to kind of understand everything that's going on in there, right? So as far as why you should use it, there are two main applications to pixels. One of them is tracking. In other words, what are people doing on the site, right? How long are they spending on pages? Which pages are they going to? What is the path that they're taking as they navigate through the site, and things like that. And then there's this concept of attribution, which, Chasen, if you're listening, maybe you can bring up the info card, right? We talked about this in another episode, but basically it's saying you're not just interested in what people are doing, but you want to know, does what people are doing have anything to do with what you, the advertiser, are doing elsewhere on another platform, let's say Facebook or Snapchat or Pinterest, right? Is the reason that somebody is navigating to the product page and purchasing an item because of the fact that they saw an ad somewhere else? A pixel is basically what allows that analysis to happen and then manifest in the platform as a conversion, right? So cool. So how they work. Now, this has evolved over time. Every platform, whether you're talking about Google Analytics, you're talking about Google Ads, you're talking about Facebook, Pinterest, Snapchat, any other platform, whether it's a tracking platform or it's an advertising platform, is going to have a slightly different approach to how the pixels actually work. Now, most of them, I will say, are starting to trend towards one more unified, uniform methodology, which is what Facebook is using now. And basically the way this works is that you have a pixel code which goes on literally every single page on your site. The pixel goes everywhere. That's like that radioactive isotope that goes into the body. It needs to cover every inch of your body so you can see even down to the finest capillaries, right? Then you have event code. The event code is a smaller snippet of code, and I will show you this in the platform demo. But the event code goes on only specific pages where you want to track a specific action. So if, for instance, I want to track when somebody signs up for a newsletter, or I want to track when somebody submits a lead, or I want to track when somebody purchases an item, there is an additional piece of code which I need to place on specific pages so that Facebook or Pinterest or GA or whatever will recognize that something specific happened for this user, right? And that event will trigger if and only if these particular actions take place, an add to cart, purchase, etc., right? So there are some other ways that this has been handled historically, and even within Facebook, you can track conversions in other ways, which I will cover during the platform demo. But that is the high-level approach. Usually, there's going to be some type of code which needs to go all over the entire site, right? And then there may be, additionally, optionally, one additional smaller piece of code that only goes on specific pages to track specific actions. There's actually one other main application for the tracking pixel which I neglected to mention, which is retargeting, right? In terms of what you can do with it. If you want to build an audience of people that have been to your site or been to particular places on your site or perform specific actions on your site, you need to have a pixel in order to do that. Otherwise, you're essentially relegated to just uploading, let's say, purchaser data, and if somebody just comes to your site and they just add something to cart, you may not know who they are, right, without the pixel. That's the beauty of the pixels. It's basically recording some of that stuff. And then one final piece is, depending on what the pixel, where it's from, the pixel may also be capturing some information about the user, what device they're using, and so forth, right? And as far as how it works, I mean, essentially, there's not a lot of complexity to it. It's a piece of code which essentially pings a server. And it just says, hey, somebody looked at me, right? And depending on who looked at it, or from where and what happened leading up to that, different things can happen. Okay, so hopefully that will suffice as just a high-level explanation of what pixels are, why you should consider using them. Again, tracking, attribution, retargeting, right? And to a certain extent, for certain types of platforms, maybe capturing certain information about the users. So with that out of the way, let's actually jump into the pixel section in our demo Facebook account, and we'll give you guys a quick run through of how you would go about finding that and pulling the pixels and setting it up. So let me make a couple of quick adjustments here. We're going to turn that off and that and this and that. There we go. Okay, so now let me pull up this window. Okay, so where are we right now? So we went into the Facebook Business Manager, and when you're in here, if you click on this, what we call the hamburger menu up here, and you go to All Tools, you'll see under Events Manager, there's this section Pixels. That's where I'm at. Once you've done that, there's a drop down here, which if you have multiple accounts in your Business Manager, you can select the specific account that you want to look at. One account can have more than one, one account may have more than one data source associated with it. So, you may pull this up and notice that there's, multiple pixels in here possibly. So for us, we just have the one pixel in here. So we're going to click into this, right? So this is the adQuadrant internal pixel. You can see some of the events that have been firing, how many have been received, and whatever the time period is here, right? So we'll click into this. Now, there are some kind of quick start ways that you can set up your pixel, but we're going to go through kind of the manual way so I can show you what the code looks like and all that stuff. So up here in the upper right, you can click on Setup and you can click on Install Pixel, right? And right here, this is where you will get the actual page view pixel code that needs to go on all portions of the site, right? So it gives you some instructions here. It's, if you're not a developer, it might be a little bit confusing, but hopefully, you've got access to a developer, or perhaps if you're using, let's say, Shopify or a WordPress site, a lot of times they have a plugin or a section where you can basically just pop in the pixel into your Shopify or WordPress interface, and then it will just populate everything where it needs to go. So down here, this right here is the code that needs to go on the site, and you can see it tells you it needs to go just above the closing portion of the head tag, right? So if you're not a developer, this may be totally Greek to you, but don't worry about it. Hopefully you've got someone that you can send this to. All right, so this is the code. The page view code needs to go everywhere on the site, right? Now, let's say, so we're going to select this manually install option here. Let's say that now you want to track when somebody is adding an item to your shopping cart, right? So right here, you'll notice that they have a set of what they call standard events. Conversions that can be tracked by the pixel fall into one of a couple different categories. So there's standard events, which are basically events that have already been set up. They're little presets for you. And you can see they kind of fall into different buckets. So depending on whether you're e-commerce and retail, or your real estate, or your professional services, they give you a little quick start of different standard events. But they have several dozen standard events. So in this case, we talked about add to cart. So here is what the standard add to cart code looks like. It's just a little bitty snippet, right? As you see, it's only 3 lines, basically. It's not as big as the page view code. And as far as where it goes, it should say on here somewhere. Yes, there it is. It says add in the event code just below the head tag. So remember, I believe it says that, we'll double check, go back and rewatch, but I'm pretty sure it said that the page view pixel actually goes within the head, right, the head tag, and then the event code goes just under the head tag. Okay, now real quick, so there's a couple of different ways that you can actually implement the pixel code. One of them is on a page load. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that when you click a button to add an item to a shopping cart, it actually takes you to a completely new page, right? Let's say that when you add it to the shopping cart, it just takes you to the shopping cart page, right? So if that's the case, what you can do is you can take that add to cart pixel and you can place it on the shopping cart page, right? And that's one way that you can do it. Now, there's also a way, if let's say you add something to cart, and you've probably seen a lot of websites like this where it just automatically adds to your shopping cart and increments the little number by the shopping cart, right? In that case, it doesn't actually send you to another page. You stay on the same URL, right? So where are you supposed to place the add to cart pixel? Well, that's where this one comes in. I'm not going to go spend a lot of time talking about it, tracking the event on an inline action, but the basic principle is that there's an extra bit of code here which essentially ties the firing of that event to interaction with a specific element on your page. In other words, in layman's terms, the pixel is firing on a button click, not on a page load, right? The trick is that depending on how your site is structured, you may not be able to use this exact code as is because it's got to tie to the name of the HTML element. If the button is called something different than add to cart button here, right, and so on and so forth, then you're going to actually have to make modifications to this. Cool. Now, I'll show you also some kind of nifty tricks because there are some things that you can do. So this contact event, if you recall from a past episode, we had set up contact, I believe, to be the event that fires when somebody submits a registration for the Q4, Crushing Q4 e-commerce event that we have coming up in August. Now, one thing that's kind of cool, I don't know if a lot of people know about this, but if you click on View Details, you can get some interesting information here about where the pixel is firing. So let's say if a competitor rips off your page and doesn't have the presence of mind to change the pixels and stuff around there, what's interesting is that you could actually potentially see under URLs here where else this is firing, right? So we actually have this on a couple different pages. Maybe the contact is not the one. Yeah, I think this is not the one that we set up for this event. But in any event, so you can see there's a couple different places where we have a contact form on our website. So on the contact, on case studies, under terms of service, careers, and then it looks like there's an obsolete page here that we phased out where a couple of events fired. So this can also be useful for you to do a sanity check if you go check every once in a while, where's my pixel firing? Is it firing anywhere else that you don't expect it to be firing, right? So then there's a couple different ways that you can look at this. What are the URLs? What are the domains, right? That will just summarize. It should just be on adQuadrant, right, at this point. And then you can also get some perspective on what devices and so forth it's showing on. Looks like most is on desktop and some is on Android. All right, so that's essentially the approach. So you essentially determine what you want to track. I mean, the first things first, right? Whatever the platform is, whether it's Google Analytics, what have you, you will place the standard tracking pixel on all pages on the site. If you happen to use Google Tag Manager, that is another way that you can approach this because you can just have the trigger, right? With the Google Tag Manager, you basically have a tag and a trigger, so the logic lives inside that container. And in that case, you can just say fire everywhere, right? And then you have the specific events, right? And those can fire again in one of two ways, which is either on the load of a page. So if somebody purchases and there's a purchase confirmation page or thank you page, then your purchase event would go on that page, right? Or you can fire it on an inline action, which is to say usually a button click, right? So if maybe you have before we made a change to our event registration page, we had a form which when you submitted, it wouldn't take you to a completely different URL. It would actually just have a little thank you message that would pop up in an iframe, let's say on the current page. Well, in that case, you're not changing URL, so you can't have that event live on a different page. We could have set it up as an inline event, but we actually did is we just set up a new discrete thank you page so that we could place the event code on there. Now, yeah, so that's basically the approach. There are a couple things I wanted to touch on because there is also a way to create a custom conversion. So before I get into this, there's also something called the custom event. And really the custom event, if I go through this again really quickly, is no more complicated than effectively just renaming a standard event. So if I go in here again to manually set up the pixel, here again is that page view pixel. It needs to go everywhere. If I click continue, manually install event code, right? Here, if I wanted to track something like add to cart, but I wanted to just call it something different, I can literally just change that piece right there that says add to cart and call it something different. And then that is essentially what is a custom event, right? And then you will notice once that starts getting some traction, you will notice it show up in the events here, right? So there's standard events, which are the ones that you saw there, page view, complete registration, contact, purchase, etc. You can make a custom event, which is just essentially changing that event name in the actual event snippet. And then there's this idea of a custom conversion. Now, I alluded before that the way that pixels are implemented has been changing over time. There are still some platforms out there that track conversions based on this methodology. Facebook gives you the option to do it kind of the old way or the new way, but some platforms may require you to do it this way. The custom conversion basically is another way of tracking events based on certain rules, right? And the rule could be as simple as just if the page view pixel fires, but not just in general, but on one specific URL, then treat that as a custom conversion. So I think we might have gone through this in a past video briefly, but let's say I know that I have my page view pixel on every single page on my site, but I don't have a standard event, right? Let's say I don't feel like reaching out to my developer, or I'm changing developers, or it's going to take too much time, and I just want to set up a conversion without placing any more code. All I have out there is the page view pixel, but it's on all sites. Well, the good news is I can create a custom conversion without any more dev work. All I have to do is tell Facebook, what do I categorize as a conversion? So in this case, it could be just the URL contains /thank-you, because I know that my purchase confirmation page, thank you page, whatever you want to call it, has that string in the URL, right? And here, yeah, it's just all URL traffic, as long as it contains that. You can give this a name, so you can call this, sale, or whatever you want to do. You select a category. In this case, it would be probably purchase, right? And then the value. So this one, it's optional, right? If you have multiple different types of items with different costs, obviously you probably want to leave this one blank, or just put in something like an average. But if for instance you have different thank you pages for different products, right? Like let's say for instance this was like product 1 / thank you, and you happen to know that product 1 has a value of $100, you could set that up in here. And then the beauty of this is that when people get there, right, if it's attributed, right, we'll touch on attribution again in a second, as long as it gets attributed to an ad view, you'll see that custom event, a custom conversion basically, show up in the platform, and it will have revenue associated with it. Now, let's talk about attribution real quick, because this is one other important thing I wanted to talk about. It's important to point out that events received, when you're looking at this, right, you might see purchases, you might see add to carts, and so forth, that are in volume significantly higher than what you're seeing in your ads manager. The reason is that this is tracking all events that happened, that fire, all the events that fire, regardless of whether or not they're attributed back to an ad view or click, right? So let's just say, for example, I go on the site, I place my page view pixels everywhere, I place my purchase pixel on the thank you page, and let's say I get 100 sales, right, over the next 7 days. So 7 days pass, I go and I look in here and I see I get 100 sales, right? So I see on here, 100 purchase fires, right? And then I go look in Ads Manager, and in Ads Manager for that same time period, I only see 20. And I'm scratching my head, I'm going, wait a minute, this says there's 100 sales, but Ads Manager is only showing me 20. Why is that? It has to do with attribution. All this is telling you is how many times did that event code trigger, right? But whether or not it shows up in Ads Manager is going to depend on whether that fire was associated with an ad view or click originally, right? In order to get credit in Ads Manager, someone had to have seen and or clicked on your ad on Facebook and then later purchased in order for the original ad to get credit, right? So you could have 100 sales during a given time period, but only the sales which originated from an ad view or click on Facebook are going to show up as a purchase in Facebook's Ads Manager platform. Okay, hopefully that made sense. But that's just a little gotcha. I mean, we've been asked before a number of times where people will look in here and they'll be confused about why there's so many more events in here and not as many in Ads Manager. That's why. This tracks everything. Ads Manager has everything that's attributed. Cool? So hopefully that all makes sense. Let's check the time here. Cool. So this is a slightly longer one. I think I've covered enough now. I mean, hopefully, if you guys are already marketing pros, then realistically you're probably going to know 99 or 100% of what I just talked about. But If you're a layperson, hopefully you found this interesting, and hopefully you followed everything. If you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to hit us up in the comments. We're always happy to answer. If there are any aspects of what I talked about that you think would be interesting for a follow-up or you want to see